Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of who has been president in the MCU. Or maybe I should say, relook at the question, because this will actually have been the third video I've done on this surprisingly interesting topic. And the last video was 10 months ago? How is that even possible? Man, time flies. But lots have changed in those 10 months. For example, the Timeline book has come out since then, and it placed Iron Man 3 in December of 2013. Now, I did an entire video on why it was placed there, but this is so important because it fixes a major issue with President Obama's term versus President Ellis's term. So we'll definitely talk about that. Also, the Netflix shows have been added to the Disney Plus timeline. They are now officially sacred timeline canon. I mean, we always knew that, right? But it's awesome to have Marvel acknowledge it. But that also means that any references to presidents in those shows are also sacred timeline canon. And Marvel released some promotional stills from Captain America 4, and I know, worst kept secret ever, right? But Thunderbolt Ross is going to become President Ross. And of course, Harrison Ford is taking up the role, R.I.P. William Hurt. But man, does this ever raise some interesting questions. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy that part of the video in particular. So let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a June contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steel book. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so make sure to check that out in case you might be interested. So one thing I want to throw out before getting into the video is, can we rely on the other pre-Disney Plus Marvel television as, telling us about the sacred timeline? I mean, they're not in the Timeline book, they're not on the Disney Plus timeline, but they were definitely originally created to be sacred timeline canon. So what do we do with them? Well, since I'm just going to use them for looking at historical president references, I think it's fine to use them in this video, but let me know your thoughts about these shows. I mean, whether they're part of the sacred timeline or a branch off of it, they're awesome shows either way. All right. Also, I want to say thank you right up front for help on this video. Man, the Marvel Cinematic Universe Wiki is amazing. Such a good resource. So, for example, I'm not going to talk about every single time a given president appears in the MCU like George Washington, but you can look it up on the wiki if you want that type of information. Love that wiki. Also, huge thanks to the Discord crew, Various, Drew, eScope, and my main man, Robbie. You guys were so helpful not only in this video, but in the past videos. So thank you so much. All right, so let's look at the historical presidents first. So George Washington, our first president. We can see his picture appeared in Secret Invasion there on the right. Of course, Spider-Man climbed the Washington Monument in Homecoming. Man, what an intense scene that was. And we see the Washington Monument in The Winter Soldier. And again, lots more proof of George Washington. I mean, every time they had a dollar bill out, that would be proof George Washington was president. I'm just touching on a few in each case. So also Thomas Jefferson, our third president, we see the Jefferson Memorial in Winter Soldier. Now, in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there's an episode where Coulson is actually a teacher. Pretty crazy, huh? But in the upper left, we see some presidents. I'm going to zoom in a bit on that, and I'm only going to mention 3 of them because we're going to see a lot of others have better, more clear references. But Adams, Madison, and Taft all appear on the wall in this episode. Then if we look at Cloak and Dagger, they actually have a therapy session in a school, and man, it's a plethora of presidents across the wall there. Everyone from John Quincy Adams, our 6th president, all the way up to Grover Cleveland, who was actually president twice. In fact, here's an example of how they zoom into some of the presidents as the episode goes on. So very cool. That was a ton of historical presidents. So we can go back here to James Buchanan, just because he gets a nice appearance in Secret Invasion. Plus, it is worth mentioning that Bucky Barnes himself was named after James Buchanan, because he's James Buchanan Barnes. Plus, you got to give a extra shout out to Abraham Lincoln, right? I love this from Falcon and Winter Soldier when U.S. agent quotes Lincoln and Bucky's like, "Lincoln, really?" And he's like, "Great man, great quote." And Bucky's like, "Not when you say it." That's so funny. Love it. And of course, the Lincoln Memorial shows up probably in many places, but particularly in Spider-Man Homecoming. You can see Spider-Man running there. Pretty funny. Then Ulysses S. Grant gets seen in Secret Invasion again. Lots of presidents show up in Secret Invasion, and gets a shout out in Ant-Man and the Wasp because he thinks of naming his aunt Ulysses S. Grant. Gotta love it. Scott Lang and his jokes. Too funny. All right, then we move to William McKinley. Now, McKinley was mentioned in Agent Carter's series as part of many different conspiracies. President McKinley, of course, was assassinated. We have Black Tuesday, and this guy's saying, "You think those things just happened?" So basically, they're saying that William McKinley, who was assassinated in real life, was actually in the MCU assassinated by characters in the story in Agent Carter. So they're turning a real-life assassination into part of the plot point. Wild, wild stuff. Theodore Roosevelt gets a nice call out in Winter Soldier when the car that Fury's in says traffic ahead. He says, give me an alternate route. And it says traffic alert on the Roosevelt Bridge. And that is definitely Theodore Roosevelt versus FDR. So let's talk about FDR. He shows up in footage in Captain America the Winter Soldier and gets a nice call out in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 7, which has some time travel. They actually go back into the time of FDR, and they mention he's going to be elected president next year. And then a few years later, he forms the SSR, which is really cool because, of course, the SSR ends up becoming S.H.I.E.L.D. So FDR is very important in the MCU. Then we have Harry Truman. Harry Truman shows up in a picture in Agent Carter and also gets mentioned when one of the characters says, I don't care if you're Vernon Masters or Harry Truman or Tarzan of the Apes. And Harry Truman shows up in a portrait in Secret Invasion. Then Dwight D. Eisenhower shows up in footage in Captain America the Winter Soldier. And John F. Kennedy gets a nice call out during Civil War when Sharon Carter is giving a eulogy for Peggy Carter and mentions how she was standing next to JFK. Also, JFK, at least it certainly is implied heavily, was assassinated by the Winter Soldier in the MCU, meaning 2 real-life presidential assassinations were due to MCU characters. Wild. And then Richard Nixon shows up in Secret Invasion in a portrait. So, let's take a little pause just to mention how many of the first 38 presidents have shown up in the MCU. Out of the 38, only 8 have not appeared. So that means 30 of the first 38 presidents have gotten some type of call out. Now, obviously, all of these were very likely presidents in the MCU. That's not my point. It's more just it's cool that so many of them showed up somewhere in the MCU. All right, how about 39 and on? Now it starts to get interesting. So Jimmy Carter showed up in Black Widow with Dreykov. Not the best person to show up with. And also, we see his portrait in Secret Invasion. Very cool. Now, Ronald Reagan actually showed up in a portrait in the flashback in Guardians 1, because remember that takes place in the 80s. And then also, we see Reagan's portrait in Secret Invasion. And he gets a nice shout out in The Winter Soldier when they talk about shut all the runways at BWI, IAD, and Reagan, of course, referring to Reagan International Airport. All right, then we move to George H.W. Bush, our 41st president. He is seen very briefly in Age of Ultron as Ultron is shifting through historical information. Hard to get a non-blurry image, but that's definitely him. And his name shows up on a book, a stack of books, in Captain America the Winter Soldier. And since they all seem to be presidential-type books, only makes sense that that's a reference to him as being president. Then we move to Bill Clinton, the 42nd president. Now, at yet another time that a president's showing up with Dreykov in Black Widow, I wonder if Bill Clinton saw the movie, was watching, and is like, hey, I don't know that dude. That dude's a scumbag. Get me out of there. A lot of presidents showing up with Dreykov. Yikes. Then we move on to George W. Bush. Now, presumably this Washington Times newspaper report is referring to President Bush. Notice in the lower middle where it says Bush says, et cetera, et cetera. Got to be President Bush, right? If it's in the Washington Times. But then also in Black Widow again, we see an important member of his cabinet, Condoleezza Rice. So yeah, definitely George W. Bush was the 43rd president. And no, I did not put that weird circle around Dreykov. That is actually in the movie. Then we move on to Barack Obama, our 44th president. So the first evidence that he's president in the MCU is when Tony Stark takes Obama's famous Hope poster and, well, turns it into Iron Man, right? Totally a Tony Stark thing to do to make it all about himself. But more importantly, we do see Jay Carney, Obama's press secretary, literally in the Avengers movie, and he's kind of doing, damage control because of the massive alien attack by the Chitauri. And actually, this is really important. We will come back to this scene in a moment. Then we also see in the pile of presidential books, one about Barack Obama. And Obama is seen multiple times and mentioned multiple times during the Luke Cage show. And then in the Empower series, which is on Disney Plus, about women throughout the MCU, if you look at the Black Panther episode, you'll see that they do show us there in the lower right-hand corner this timeline of the Wakanda, and in particular, they mention Barack Obama becoming president in 2009. Next is Matthew Ellis, the 45th president, and the first fictitious president in the MCU. But right off the bat, we have to talk about this welcome back cap quote attributed to President Matthew Ellis. Now, of course, this appeared during Captain America the Winter Soldier. It's a Captain America memorial, if you remember. However, Cap would have been unfrozen in 2011. So are we now saying that Ellis was president in 2011? Well, no, we know that can't be true because we saw that Obama was president during the Chitauri invasion. So what does this mean? Well, probably Ellis was an important political figure. I'm going to go with senator, and we'll talk more about why later. But since this memorial was created after he became president, of course they're going to use his highest rank, in this case, president. So this makes sense. And we know, of course, Ellis was president because he shows up throughout the Iron Man 3 movie. He's a major character in the movie. And then I think we can get a big hint as to when he became president from one of the trailers. If you go check out the Iron Man 3 trailers, there's this quote, which unfortunately didn't appear in the movie, so technically isn't canon, but it does give us an idea of what Marvel was thinking. So notice he says, "You elected me on a single platform. I will defend this country at all cost." Of course, he's saying that because of the Mandarin attack. But I think the key is, this is implying he was very recently elected, and my guess is he was elected because people viewed Obama as failing to protect the country during the Shatari invasion. Isn't that interesting? So that's why I say I don't think he was part of Obama's administration. You know, if they wanted somebody different, they wouldn't pick his vice president, for example. I'm betting he was a high-ranking senator and definitely, a America First type senator fighting for protection of the country, and that's how he got elected. Very interesting. All right, so here's more evidence that he probably helped with policy prior to being president, because Killian says after years of dodging the president's ban on immoral biotech research. So that implies the current president, Ellis, had something to do with it because it's been out there for a while, years of dodging it. Well, maybe he was a high-ranking senator that helped pass the policy. Very interesting. Also, Killian says, well, 2 years ago, the elephant in the room was this scow. And of course, you'll remember that when she spilled 1 million gallons of crude off Pensacola, thanks to you, not one fat cat saw a day in court. So again, I could see him having been a high-ranking senator who maybe used his leverage to get these guys off the hook, because it happened 2 years ago. Then, as Killian says, I just needed a reason to kill you that would play well on TV. So clearly Ellis has been in politics for a while, very famous face. And of course, he almost did die, right? And had he died, well, then his vice president would have been president, and which, by the way, is the first time we've seen a vice president in the MCU that I can remember, at least. And of course, this guy was working for Killian. So there's all a plan to get rid of the president and put this guy in charge. Of course, Ellis then went on to appear in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., WHIH Newsfront. He was really, really visible for several years in the MCU. And so I do think this finally seems to have resolved this issue that we had in the past of when was Obama president and when was Ellis president. If you look at all the different hints and clues we saw here, most importantly that Iron Man 3 is now in 2013, not 2012, then I think this works out. Let me know your thoughts, but I really think we can call this mystery solved. All right, so how about our next presidents? Donald Trump, 46th president. So I want to stress up front, these are not me trying to share my opinions. These are the characters in the shows, which aren't always flattering, the things they have to say. Just saying that up front. But anyway, one of the characters is saying, I haven't felt this weird since November 9th. That's referring to Trump winning over Hillary. And then later he even calls Luke Cage Luke Trump, referring to Cage as basically a dictator. There's a really funny scene in the final episode of Runaways, which involves time travel. And this poor Hillary voter is saying, I can't die before Hillary's elected. And he says, have you told them? No, please don't. The truth about the election. So in other words, implying that, yeah, Hillary is not going to win and that Trump is actually the one that wins. And then in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., another time travel episode, they talk about the fact that I'm a fan of the 21st century. And Daisy says, yeah, don't get your hopes up. We make a mean prosthetic, but fascism is back. So, yeah, ouch. A lot of not too positive comments, but the point is Donald Trump clearly was president, as seen in multiple entries throughout the MCU. Then also, the question comes, was he still president after the blip? Because of all things, I'm going to look at Hellstrom. I know, Hellstrom, right? But Hellstrom actually takes place during the blip in 2020. And notice this newspaper article that appeared in the show says U.S. diplomats arranged a briefing last week with outside experts who warned the president that trade tensions could imperil the economy and hurt his re-election bid. So that seems to be referring to the same president that would have been president, in 2016 is still president going into the 2020 election. So I know, can we really count on Hellstrom? But still, it's very interesting. You're going to see that this kind of fits into an overall theme I'm going to go into with these last few presidents. So was Biden ever president? Honestly, we just don't know. There is no evidence whatsoever so far of whether Biden was president at all. So for now, we're going to have to put it aside as an open question, although I do have some theories that I'll discuss in a moment. And then we move on to Ritson. So Ritson is the 40 I don't know-th president, because we don't know if Biden was president or not. But we do know Ritson was indeed president, at least. He was president in 2025 because in Wakanda Forever, the news ticker says President Ritson signed trade pact with New Asgard. We also know he was president because of Secret Invasion and his infamous quote of signing a bill that designates all off-world-born species enemy combatants, and we will kill every last one of you. Yikes. But the reason that's important is that led Fury to say that's real one-term president stuff. So that tells us a couple things. A, he's most likely not going to get reelected, but B, he's in his first term as president. That's really important. We're going to see that really factor in just a minute. So the question is, what is Ritson's fate? Because we know from the promo photo that I showed you earlier at the beginning of the video that Harrison Ford is going to take over Thunderbolt Ross's role and become president after Ritson. So what happens to Ritson? Well, first of all, let's look really quickly at a timeline here. You can check out my other videos if you want to know why I'm putting these months and years in the timeline. But we know for certain when Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special happened because of the timeline book. It's December of 2025. So everything else is after that. My guess is that with Secret Invasion being in November and the same with the Marvels, that Captain America 4 is probably going to be early 2027 maybe. So how does Ritson no longer become president? Well, he could lose. Of course, in what year? I mean, are we really going to move all the way to 2028? The next election? That seems really unlikely. But so at some point, he could just lose the election. He could be impeached. Certainly that declaration he made of killing all the aliens on Earth could have led to him being impeached. He might just resign out of embarrassment. Or one of the craziest things is maybe he's killed by a Skrull hunter that mistakes him for someone impersonating the president. Well, that would be crazy, right? Karma, man, karma. Anyway, somehow Ritson ends up no longer being the president. And then we get this very interesting quote. So in Comic-Con, people were actually shown some of the movie. And one of the big-time quotes that come out of the movie is Thunderbolt Ross, now President Ross, saying, "They told me lose the mustache or the election." So that certainly implies he won outright in an election. So maybe we have the answer as to what happened to Ritson. Very interesting. So let's look at the open questions we have about the most recent presidents. So we have Trump. We know he started in 2017, but was he blipped? Did he finish his term? What about Biden? Was Biden ever even president at all? What about Ritson? Is it possible that we don't even know when he started his term because maybe the blip moved things around and changed the election cycle? I got a really interesting theory on that. I'll get back to that in just a second. And then Ross. When did Ross run? Did he run in 2026, 27? 28? What is going on here, right? There were so many unknowns, and hopefully we're going to get them answered when Captain America 4 comes out. But I'm going to throw out my theories at this point, and I'd love to know yours. So I'm going to first say I don't think Trump was blipped. I think he finished his term, his first term, and if nothing else, the Hellstrom newspaper article kind of seems to indicate that. So I'm going to go with that for the minute. Then I'm going to say he didn't win re-election, and Biden won. But I'm going to throw out this crazy idea that when everybody returned from the blip, half of America, think about it, did not vote on who they wanted for president in 2020 because half of them were blipped. So there was a massive outrage when they came back that they wanted a re-election now, instantly. This is not right. And I'm not even saying it's because they didn't like Biden. It's they didn't get a choice. Half of America did not vote in that election. Isn't that wild? So I think Ritson then got elected in a special election in 2023, October of 2023, and then was allowed to finish out a cycle to 2026. The reason I like that is because that allows Ross to run for president and win in 2026, November 2026, and be president in early 2027, which is when I think Captain America 4 is going to take place. And then, of course, we don't know when his term will end. So I don't know. What do you think about this? It's the only way I can make this work so that Ross is newly elected when I think Captain America 4 is coming out. Plus, I just love the idea of people coming back from the blip and being like, hey, I didn't vote on the president. We want a new election right now. So craziness. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on all of this. I read every comment and respond to all of them. All right, so June contest. Don't forget, be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steel book. And of course, we have that membership option in case you might be interested in it. And lastly, we have the Discord. I always love to talk about the Discord. So much going on. We have X Monday rewatch parties. As you can see, we also have mutant rewatches on Wednesdays, and more of those mutant rewatches all the way into July. We have WandaVision, then Foxverse rewatches on Fridays. So much going on. And of course, we mostly talk about Star Wars, DC, and Marvel, but we have an other media forum where you can talk about anything you possibly can imagine. So, over 1,400 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and we would like you to be a part of it. I will leave a pinned comment so that you can join the server. And also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.